Hello guys and professor, hope you are doing very well. Today's presentation is about science fiction. My partner Jair and me, Milagro, are going to present different aspects about science fiction. Let's get started by explaining some general aspects or introducing aspects about science fiction. Science fiction is all about theoretical science, imagining future technological advances, often related to space and time travel, and also alien invasions. The genre became split into two different types: hard science fiction and soft science fiction. When we talk about hard science fiction, we refer to the real science, and when we talk about soft science fiction, we refer to social science or structures of human society. Also, in science fiction, there are some related genres, including Gothic fiction. It refers to supernatural rather than scientifically based elements. Then high fantasy. It often refers to fantastic imaginary worlds. And the last one, dystopian um, fiction. It refers to imaginary communities or societies that are dehumanized. As we are going to listen in our presentation, some authors of science fiction are scientists themselves and tend to write about technologies they wish could be true or they could exist in the real world, knowing that absolutely they couldn't. And on the other hand, there are other authors of science fiction who write their texts or who wrote their texts based on their own imagination. Another important element in our presentation is the important events that have happened during this developmental process of science fiction genre. In the 17th century, writers began producing speculative fictions about new discoveries and technologies that the application of scientific method may bring about. One genre that is friendly to science fiction speculation was the utopian fantasy, whose usual narrative form was the imaginary budget. The imaginary budget was also the usual narrative form of satirical fantasies. Throughout the 18th century, such fictions were blocked by the lack of acceptable imaginary devices capable of opening up the limits between space and time. Then we have the Gold Age science fiction. The Gold Age science fiction is often recognized like the period from the 1930s through the 1950s. This period was an era during which the science fiction genre gained wide public attention and many classic fiction stories were published. By the 1960s and the 1970s, science fiction generated by the new wave reflected dramatical changes in contemporary cultures, especially talking about political aspects of genre, conflicts, and freedom of expression. And finally, from the human perceptions, science fiction has grown from more or less acceptable science focus in the early 20th century to adopt more like sociological and cultural factors over time. The main cause of science fiction genre was the development of technology. As we already knew, writers started creating their texts based on speculative perceptions regarding technological and scientific advances and new technological devices. Now let's move on some characteristics of science fiction genre.
Moving on to the characteristics of this genre speculates about a more advanced science than the one we really have in our time. Topics like robots, planet invasion, extreme medical and science advances, aliens, massive weapons, or speaking and deformed animals are related to sci-fi. The protagonist of this story is the story itself, because it is more focused on the events than in the characters. This genre expresses humans' desires, its fears related to the science advances, and its points of view about those advances, and make conscious about the danger of all those advances. The great majority of these topics are impossible in real life, but some topics are an hyperbole of real-life events, like atomic bombs, wars, experiments, and space trips. Moving on to the important agents, George Orwell is a master of science fiction for his works in 1984 and Animal Farm. Orwell was born Eric Arthur Blair on June 25 in 1903 in eastern India, the son of a British colonial civil servant. He was educated in England and, after left Eton, joined to the Indian Imperial Police in Burma, then a British colony. He resigned in 1927 and decided to become a writer in 1928. He moved to Paris, where lack of success as a writer forced him into a series of manual jobs. He described his experience in his first book, Down and Out in Paris and London, published in 1933. He took the name of George Orwell shortly before its publication. This was followed by his first novel, Burma's Days, in 1934. Now Ray Bradbury, perhaps best known for Fahrenheit 451 and The Martian Chronicles, wrote a poem rich in metaphor called Through and Space. Ray Bradbury was an American fantasy and horror author who rejected being categorized as a science fiction author, claiming that his work was based on the fantastical and unreal. Author Ray Douglas Bradbury was born in August 22 in 1920 in Waukegan, Illinois, to Leonard Spalding Bradbury and Linneman of Power and Telephone Utilities, and Esther Mockbury Bradbury, a Swedish immigrant. Now Isaac Asimov, whose insightful and provocative works included I, Robot, and numerous other science fiction stories, explore the role of technology as a force impacting human free will. Isaac Asimov was born in Isaac Yudovic Asimov on January 2, 1920, in Petrovic, Russia, to Anna Rachel Berman and Yuda Asimov. The family immigrated to the United States when Asimov was a toddler, studying into the East New York section of Brooklyn. Isaac Asimov immigrated with his family from Russia to the U.S. and became biochemistry professor while pursuing writing. He published his first novel, Pebble in the Sky, in 1950. Now, Philip Dick is another master of sci-fi. Mr. Spaceship is about a human brain retrofitted to control a spaceship. Philip Dick, in full, Philip Kindred Dick, born in December 16, 1928, and died March 2, 1982, was an American science fictional writer whose novels and short stories often depict the psychological struggles of characters trapped in illusory environments. Finally, Ursula Le Guin is one of the best science fiction writers, blending soft science fiction with young adult fantasy to create futuristic worlds exploring gender, identity, religion, and natural environment. Ursula Kroeber was born in 1929 and grew up in Berkeley, California. Her parents were anthropologist Alfred Kroeber and writer Theodora Kroeber, author of Ish. She attended Radcliffe College and she graduated in Columbia University. She died in 2018. Now moving on to the consequences of the genre, sci-fi may have a protagonist paper on nowadays pieces of art. As technology continues its development, new ideas are arriving to the writers' heads. There are also many topics related to sci-fi works that have become real, for example, animal clonation. This literary genre has the particularity that makes people conscious about what they are reading and make them discuss the morality in the experimentation that is present in the fictional representations of reality. This genre has changed the cinema. In the golden years of sci-fi, many excellent movies emerged, and until these days we are continuing seeing many movies based or inspired on old literature works. Other popular sagas like Star Wars and Star Trek are completely sci-fi pieces. The complexity of the stories helped also to change from the mute cinema to the sounding cinema because sci-fi stories need to be explained to be developed. Sci-fi has also an impact on the different way of our entertainment. For example, the video games industry is so big and generates billions of dollars, and many stories that are present on those video games are based on sci-fi old stories. Video games like Halo, Combat Evolved have produced millions of dollars to Microsoft, and its inspiration in different sci-fi works is evident. Now moving on to the piece of art, we select "Do Androids Dreams with Electric Ships" by Philip Dick. Why do we select this novel? Well, this novel is about an agent that has to hunt some illegal androids that are in a dystopian Earth. The novel represents the debate that if the androids that look equally to a human have the same rights, and if it is morally correct to kill them even though we look as them. The story shows the human's feelings to be superior of everything that is not a human, just like animals in real life. We consider this the peak of sci-fi because that shows the both worlds of how it is to live being an android in that world and how it is to live as a human.